Aegon the Sixth, the Young Dragon, as I like to call him. I know he's called Young Griff, but I like to call him the Young Dragon. So he's a very, very interesting character for a number of different reasons. Aside from him personally, which we'll get into a bit, he's just very interesting because of when he comes in. He comes into our story 2/3 of the way through. He comes in at the end of book 5, and book 5 and 4 are the same book. They're just split in half because George can't edit. And he shows up and he's this super important character, and it's almost near the end of the story. Like, Dany's about to come back. The War of the Five Kings is over. The White Walker, the others are moving south. It's like we've reached our climax, and then George just throws another log onto the fire. So you got to wonder what's going to happen. How is this going to play out? Because George is many things, but he's not stupid. So obviously there's something he's going to do with this. One of the things, though, is George sometimes likes to play things straight. He sometimes likes to do subversions, and he sometimes likes to shock people. So with Aegon, I don't really know what he's going for. He could be playing this whole thing straight, which is actually what I would prefer. And Aegon is exactly who he says he is, and is exactly what he appears to be, which would kind of be interesting because no one else in this series is what anybody thinks they are. Or he could be fake Aegon. Who knows, and does it really matter, to be honest? So let's just take a look at what the geopolitical situation is. So Westeros is a disaster zone at the moment. The Iron Throne only controls the Westerlands, the Crownlands, and the Reach. Fully, the other kingdoms, some of them they control part of, like the Stormlands or the Riverlands. Some of them are nominally independent, like the Vale or Dorne. Others are still largely in rebellion, like the North and the Iron Isles. So things are kind of a mess over there. They still have the strong Tyrell armies, but without Tywin Lannister and now Kevin Lannister to hold things together, the Lannister side really doesn't have a leader, which leaves Mace Tyrell, who's not exactly that competent, in charge of the whole alliance. They just don't really have that many savvy political figures left. I'm sure Willis or Garland could take the reins, but their legitimacy to kind of be the rulers of Westeros rests on Cersei and Tommen. And Tommen's a boy who can't be anything more than a figurehead at this point. And Cersei literally just screwed the pooch by letting the Faith Militant take over King's Landing and arrest her. And even if the Tyrells come in and save her, that's got to be a really big blow to their prestige. Especially if Marjorie gets found guilty and gets executed or whatever. They're in a really bad position. I mean, they're theoretically in a good position militarily, but politically things are not going very well for them. The rest of the world's not really doing any better. Dany is about to fight the big battle at Meereen using her dragons, where she's going to fight a bunch of different slaver fleets. And hopefully the Iron Fleet is going to take her to Westeros, but who even knows what's going to happen, if Dany's going to even go there in Winds of Winter, if she's ever going to go there at all. Like, who knows what's going on with her plot. But that part of the world has just become a disaster zone. It's cataclysmic. In the north, the others are coming. It's like things are just insane. It seemed like what was going to happen is kind of what happened in the show. The others are going to show up. Dany's going to come in like the Wing Hussars and save the day. And then she's going to go go south and conquer King's Landing. So we have all this drama coming on, and then we just have this guy enter. And he is not only the most qualified person, but he probably has the best claim to the throne. Now, once again, so that's kind of the background. He comes in at a very interesting time, both in terms of how far along it is and in the environment. And Varys kind of says that he had set it up this way, that a lot of the chaos and a lot of the stuff that happened was to weaken everybody, to kind of destroy everything, to bring down the nobility, etc. So the conditions would be ripe for Aegon to show up as the savior and become king. Now, is that true? How much of this is Varys just claiming credit for things that wound up happening? How much of this is like chaos as a ladder? How much was he actually involved with this? Was this always his plan? Is this just a plan he came up with later? Who knows? Varys lies about everything. We just have to keep this in mind. Whenever he says something, you have to take it with a massive grain of salt. Once again, we have no idea what Varys' motives are. There's always the theory that he was actually a Blackfire or something like that. But honestly, there's a decent possibility he could be kind of what he says he is. He serves the realm and he serves order because someone has to, in his own kind of twisted 4D chess way. I could actually see that being possible. That's kind of what they went with in the show. That ultimately he isn't a selfish figure, even if he is devious and conniving and cunning. He is in service of the greater good. So what are the possible origin stories for Aegon? Where did he come from? The first one, which is the one he says, is that he's the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Aelia Martell. Rhaegar had 2 children, a boy and a girl. If we want to say Jon is one, then I guess he had 3 children because the dragon has to have 3 heads, but I digress. And supposedly they both died when the Mountain and Amory Lorch infiltrated her tower and killed Aelia Martell and her 2 children. Now, Varys claims that that's not what happened. What happened is he bought a baby that looked kind of like Aegon in Flea Bottom and traded him for I think it was like a cask of Dornish wine or Arbor Gold or something. And he did a baby swap. He swapped Aegon with that baby, and he took the real Aegon across the narrow sea and had him raised by Jon Connington, the former Hand of the King and Rhaegar's best friend. So that is the first one, and a lot of people like to dismiss this story, but to me there's nothing really that improbable about that story and nothing that really goes out of character. Because Varys was always down with Aerys. I mean, when we think about when Tywin showed up, Varys said, don't open the gates. And Pycelle said, yeah, open the gates. Also, there's kind of some other hints throughout that Varys tended to like the Targaryens better, but that's for another time. But is that something Varys would do? Would he swap a baby and send him across the narrow sea to be raised as a future king in case Robert didn't work out? Yeah, that's 100% something he would do. It plays into everything, seeking the greater good in a devious way. It's a backup plan to a backup plan. So if Robert doesn't work out and the other people he's going to try to replace Robert with don't work out, he has his ace in the hole that he can pull out at the last minute. Swapping a baby isn't really that difficult for him. I mean, he goes and he frees Tyrion and he leads Tyrion to Tywin's tower. So he could definitely use a secret passage or something. Show up there, swap the babies. Amory, Lorch, and the Mountain are dumb as turkeys. They wouldn't have noticed. Getting a baby across the ocean is really not that difficult, especially when he has Illyrio to help him. So, like, there's nothing really improbable or difficult to believe, and it seems to go along with everyone's modus operandi, etc. So that's theory number 1. Theory number 2 is that he's a Blackfire. So the Blackfires were a cadet branch of House Targaryen. Basically what had happened was Aegon the Unworthy legitimized all of his bastards before he died, and he gave his eldest son, Daemon the Sword Blackfire. So Daemon took the name Blackfire. Blackfire being the sword held by Targaryen kings from Aegon I onward. The issue was Aegon the Unworthy also had a trueborn son. So the question is, who gets to inherit first? A legitimized bastard who's older, or the younger trueborn son? It's the succession was not clear at all, and that led to the first Blackfire Rebellion, where a bunch of the kind of upstart houses took the side of the Blackfires, and there was a huge war. And Daemon died, but he had a bunch of sons, and they all fled across the sea with Bittersteel, and they kept coming back time and time again to try to take over Westeros and seat one of their own on the throne. People have compared it to the Stuarts or to the Carlists. Or, I mean, the Jacobins or the Carlists in terms of the far-off rival dynasty that keeps trying to retake power but keeps failing through failed rebellions. Anyways, it is thought that the Blackfires end when Meleys the Monstrous was slain by Barristan Selmy during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. However, it should be noted that George very specifically says the male line came to an end. Now, saying that there's a male line implies that there's also a female line. I mean, doesn't it? I mean, that just makes sense, because you would just say the Blackfires came to an end if that was the end of them. By saying the male line came to an end, that implies there's a female line, and it's kind of making it seem important by omission, isn't it? So it's possible there was still a female line around. Now, Illyrio married a woman named Sarah, which is interesting, so we'll get to another possible theory in a moment, but who looked very much like a Targaryen. She had silver hair. Her eyes were blue, but blue is pretty close to violet, so it's possible. She could have been a female Blackfire. So some people think young Griff is actually Illyrio and Sarah's son, and this whole Rhaegar thing is something they came up with to fool John Connington into raising Illyrio's son as like a 4D chess plan to take over the Seven Kingdoms. It's also thought that Varys could be a Blackfire too, descended from the female line, of course, but it's never mentioned what his eye color is, which is kind of interesting, so it could potentially be violet. He also shaves his head. Now, does he shave his head because he's trying to like be weird, or is it because he has silver hair? That's certainly a possibility. Also, we know that his phallus was cut off as part of a ritual, as part of blood magic, and as we've seen throughout A Song of Ice and Fire, the strongest blood magic comes from the blood of a king. So if he was a Blackfire, that would make his phallus and his blood extremely valuable. So that's kind of the second major theory of Aegon, is that Varys and Illyrio have this big plan to basically win the Blackfire Rebellion by putting him on the throne. Now, there's a question, does it really matter whether or not he's a Blackfire? In my opinion, I don't think it super does, because the Blackfires are still Targaryens. They are a legitimized cadet branch. So I think it is possible. I do think he still would have a claim. He may even have a better claim because of agnatic succession. I'm not sure exactly how their version of it works, but he might inherit before Dany, even though he's the descendant of a female from the family. So I do think he has a claim under those circumstances. And then the third theory is that he's a distant descendant of Sarah the Rogue Princess. Whether or not Illyrio Sarah is descended from that Sarah, I don't really know, to be honest. It's certainly a possibility, but that's kind of a third position we could have. That, but once again, he's a Targaryen, if that's the truth. So those are kind of the theories, and that's all very interesting, and that's, I think, some of the more likely theories, because there actually is a lot of in-text evidence to support it. Like, there are a lot of clues that could say he is the real Aegon, he is the fake Aegon, he is the descendant of Sarah. It could be any of these things. But it's interesting that it's a theory that actually will probably go somewhere, unlike most of them. Anyways, so Aegon the Sixth, the Young Dragon himself. It's really interesting to have him put in, because I've heard that he's exactly how George describes what a good ruler would be. Well-educated, coming from a somewhat humble background, knowing what it's like to be hungry, to be unsafe, knowing how the common people live, being a skilled warrior, believing that kingship is a duty, not a right, and that the purpose of a king is to rule to make the lives of his people better. So he does kind of embody the ideal monarch. And he's been raised that way, as Varys put it. He's been taught the faith of the Seven, which is very important, because most monarchies have a religious succession law. That is, only members of a certain religious denomination can ascend to the throne, be it Catholicism, Protestantism, some denomination of Islam, etc. Like the Saudis would never let a Christian ascend to the Saudi throne, and the Spanish wouldn't let a Protestant ascend to the Spanish throne. And that's kind of one of my issues with Jon Snow becoming king or Daenerys becoming king, is neither of them are Faith of the Seven. I suppose Dany could convert to Faith of the Seven, but I think that might exclude her from the succession, is her not formally being part of the faith. But Aegon is learned in the faith. He's been taught economics, history, rulership. He knows how to fight. He knows how to lead. He's been taught military strategy. He's been very well educated. These are all very important things in a ruler to make them a success. And on top of that, like I said, he hasn't lived a super easy life. He's been protected and he's been trained, but he's lived a life on the run. He knows what it's like to be hungry. He knows how the common people live, etc. Actually, an interesting parallel is he wears a straw hat, and the only other character in The Song of Ice and Fire who wears a straw hat is Aegon the Unlikely. Interestingly enough, the last king to be called Aegon. Also, Dunk and Duck are kind of similar, both in terms of their personality and the role they play. Now, unfortunately, we haven't really seen too much of what Aegon is like. He seems to be a good kid who's good at just about everything he sets his mind to. He seems like a mentally stable version of Rhaegar, which is good because Rhaegar, I'm 90% sure, had severe bipolar if he wasn't like a sociopath or something. But Rhaegar was really messed up. Aegon doesn't seem to have any of those issues. He definitely has a bit of a temper. He's young, experienced. He's probably a little rash. But if he can survive this war, he might be the next Jaehaerys the First. He has a lot of potential. He seems like a really good kid. I can't see him going down a really dark path. I could see him in his attempt to be noble and gallant getting himself killed, but I really can't see him becoming a villain or anything like that. So really, the only couple things we have to show what his personality is like is, firstly, we have him, he manages to, with his charisma, convince the Golden Company when Jon Connington failed and Viserys failed, that he's going to be the one to take them back. He's like, look, stop it. I'm going to take you back. You're going to get all your stuff back. You can trust me. This is your chance. And he is charismatic. He is willing to lead from the front. And he does inspire loyalty in the people who follow him. So to me, I think the main kind of bit of character development we do see with him is that he's very able to learn lessons, learn from mistakes, or learn lessons when people teach him. So kind of a theme between Tyrion and Jon Connington and him is the whole idea of trust. So Tyrion and him are playing Cyvasse, I think it's called. And Tyrion at the beginning gives him a couple tips that wind up with Aegon losing the game. And Aegon gets really angry and tosses the board over. And Tyrion, who's cynical and drunk at this point, gives this big speech about how you never trust anyone. You don't trust Jon Connington. You don't trust Septa Lemore. You don't trust Rolly Duck. You just stay awake all the time and you're just paranoid about everything. And a king can't be that way, because the last guy who was like that was Aerys II, and that was a disaster. Joffrey was kind of like that. It's to be a good ruler, you have to have people around you can trust. You have to have good ministers. You have to have a good hand. You have to have good council members that you can delegate to do stuff, because you can't do everything yourself. And you have to have good, loyal men around you. And so when Griff goes and talks to Jon Connington, he's like, okay, so Tyrion said don't trust anybody. And he's like, I think Tyrion does have a bit of a point here, because there are going to be people who are going to try and take advantage of me. And Jon Connington, I think, gives him very good advice in return. There is a lot of truth to that, but as a king, you do need people to follow you. So let men prove themselves through loyal service and then gain your trust. And to me, that seems like very, very wise advice. Let them fight for you, put their lives in danger for you, put their fortune and their titles on the line for you, and then you can trust them. So Aegon listens to both sides, and kind of where we see him implement this is he names Raleigh Duck to the Kingsguard. And Jon's like, no, you shouldn't be naming Raleigh Duck to the Kingsguard. We need to give it to some bigger house. And Aegon's like, look, Duck would die for me. He has proven himself time and time again to be a loyal man who will fight and die for his king, and that's who I want watching my back. Because I know I can depend upon him, and to me that's more important than winning a couple political points by appointing some highborn guy from a house that I might have to defeat to the Kingsguard. And to me that really shows that he was able to learn that lesson, and he was able to find that middle path and kind of gain in wisdom from it, and not either be too trusting like he used to be, or take Tyrion's advice and become a paranoid schizophrenic. So I think if young Griff is able to win the war and become king, then he will be one of the greatest kings Westeros has ever seen. Now the question is, what's going to happen between him and Dany? And this is the issue, because technically they could marry, but we're told Dany can't have children anymore, and there needs to be an heir. So who knows what's going to happen? They could both be monarchs jointly, or they could marry and Aegon could take multiple wives, or Dany could just step aside and keep her title as like Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea and become Lady, a Queen of Dragonstone, whereas Aegon becomes a King of the Seven Kingdoms. Like, we don't really know what's going to happen. I can't see Dany really roasting him, though. I think there's going to be some awkwardness, but I can't really see her killing the only other Targaryen left. And once again, even if he is a Blackfire, or even if he is Sarah's descendant, a dragon, red or black, is still a dragon. And for that matter, people call him the Mummer's Dragon, but that doesn't mean he's a fake dragon. It just means he's Varys' dragon. And Varys is the Mummer. That's his nickname. And he's backing Aegon. So those are my thoughts on Aegon the Sixth Targaryen, the Young Dragon. Character profile series is back. If you have any suggestions, please post them in the chat. This is Arjun. As always, we must dissent.